The cover stolen about 30 times.
Right. Funny, somebody, I was photographing a priest once, and he said, Mr. Couvrette, are you religious? And I said, no, I'm litigious. I've tried to settle most things out of court. That one was settled in court, in a pre-trial, but suing people is not fun. And it's funny because in this particular case, if the organization that stole the picture, and I use the word stole very carefully, stole it, ended up paying me $250, they would have got the rights to that picture to use it where they did. I asked them for that, and they said, we'll give you a $250 ad on our radio station. And I said, I'll see you in court. They would have spent for their lawyer at least, to fly him in from Toronto, the top copyright guy, $15,000. Wow. They lost that. They lost that. And I took him on myself. I didn't even hire a lawyer. The case was so simple that by the time the lawyer from Toronto heard my statement and heard the station manager saying, well, I found it on Google so I could use it, he was like, please, God. You know, he collected the money anyway. He didn't care. But we laughed about it later. Yeah, so I haven't ever lost one. I've negotiated a lot of cases. I mean, I used to sue the citizen all the time. Well, I didn't sue them. I used to send them letters about pictures they had stolen, right? And it was really kind of funny because at some point it got to the point where the photo editor, I would call him and go, such and such, let's call him Bob. Bob, yeah, at today's paper, and he would go, oh, that's one of yours? He said, how much? I said, $100. Okay, fine. And it's funny because I had an assistant, whose name was Mike, it's okay, he lives in Toronto now, who was with me for 5 years, and at some point, he called because they stole one of his. And he got no response, nothing. And finally, after 3 phone calls, he came back to me and he was almost crying. He said, I did exactly the same stuff as you. And you know what they said to me? They said, no, we're not going to pay you. You're not Paul Couvrette. And that wasn't about my ego, by the way, which is already large. It wasn't about my ego. You know what that meant? That was because they knew he was a little guy and he wouldn't sue them. And they knew I would sue their ass. And that's why they would say, how much, Paul? How much do you want this time? It's as simple as that. I had once Ledois tell me that they could take a picture, a full 2-page spread I did in Time magazine, put it on a copying machine, and put it on the cover of their paper. I'm like, who does that? Are you kidding me? I sued Ottawa U Law School for stealing my pictures. And they lost. Well, they negotiated out once I told them what was going to happen to them. And I told them that it would be in the newspaper when I won, and they went, eeks, yikes, okay.
So can everybody hear Paul without the microphone?
So yeah.
Maybe grab the mic.
Okay. Anyway, so that's, I mean, I could go on about the lawsuit stuff, but.
Slides.
Slides. I'm not good at this stuff, I told you. All right. Well.
Do we have a question from this side?
Who else wants?
Paul, could you tell us more about teaching photography to the Queen?
Yes. That was, oh, I finally figured this out. I'm going to start doing beatbox stuff. Yes, it was in a number of magazines in the last couple of years, particularly when the Queen passed. What happened was that I left Canada, did a degree in journalism, left Canada, and moved to England. I have had extreme luck in my life. I don't know how this occurred, but I started a business with $300 basically. My family were relatively poor, and I've had luck. I got a job at a place called Wallace Heaton, which was the first camera store in the world, established in 1839. it was on Bond Street, and the people coming into this store were princes and Saudi princes. They were royalty, they were everything. At some point, movie stars, actors, it's the whole long story. It's a 2-hour story, but at one point a woman walked in and was standing in a small lineup to drop off some film. I walked up to her and said, I recognized her right away. It wasn't the Queen, it was her sister. I guess it was her sister, yeah. So I said, ma'am, I can serve you over here. She said, that's perfectly fine. I'll wait. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing that she didn't take her royal presence. So about a week later, she comes to my counter and she says, after getting her pictures and shows them to me, I was 22 years old. Everybody else who worked in the store was about 60 to 65. They wore 3-piece suits. We all wore 3-piece suits. They wore bowler hats to work, not kidding. Very old, stuffy English. Walked up and said, you know, these pictures aren't so good, are they? And I went, no, ma'am, they're not. And she said, well, is there something wrong with the camera? And I said, no, that camera's perfectly fine. I'm afraid it's the photographer. And she said, really? She said, well, do you give lessons? And I said, I could do. And she said, great, you know. And she said, I would like my mom to learn how to photograph those dogs. And I went, your mom? Yes. Elizabeth. R. Okay, so come to the palace next week, please. And I did. And from that experience, a couple of, you know, sitting down with them going, okay, here's how you focus, here's how you do, here's a different thing you could do, blah, 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 blah. I then was called to photograph the Queen when she came to the Constitution repatriation, whatever the hell it was called. And that was an experience on its own because literally I ended up being in a room with the Queen and one other person on 4 or 5 occasions. It was very odd. A lot of interesting things. There were 20 stories related to that. I will tell you one. I ended up getting to photograph the Queen and the Prime Minister, Trudeau at the time, in a small dinner party. And there are rules to the Queen thing, massive rules. And you read the Riot Act by 5 levels of security and protocol. One of the things you do not do with the Queen is photograph her eating. The Queen does not chew. Simple as that. That's what they actually said. The Queen does not, Her Majesty does not chew. Okay. So there I am on a raised dais at a hotel in Ottawa with telephoto lens and whatnot with 2 other photojournalists. And literally, I'm there, and sure enough, the salad comes out. And these guys have read the Riot Act too, by the way. And I'm there, I put my hands down, and click, click, click. These guys were disappeared out of that balcony faster than you say Bob's your uncle. And apparently they were dragged out into the hall, and the film for the entire shoot was just pulled out of their cameras. End of story. And you do not mess with royal security. You do not mess with them. And so I basically later sold those pictures of the Queen and Trudeau because I had the only pictures. The other guys were furious at me, but I said, guys, you know, what did you need a picture of the Queen chewing for? Like, stupid. I knew them both, by the way. They're both CP photographers. But yeah, so there are 100 stories. One quick last one with the Queen. At some point during the because you meet about 10 times with security and protocol before, at some point during one of the meetings, I said, okay, when Her Majesty walks in here, I'm going to be walking up the stairs, and I'll be walking backwards up 3 stairs. I'll count them out, 1, 2, 3 in my head. And I said, so what happens if when the Queen is walking up, she's wearing this thing, what happens if she trips? What do I do? And they said, you do not touch her. We have people for that. I always remember that line, we have people for that. Okay, fine. So there's somebody within a certain distance that obviously is ready to grab her. But yeah, so it was a series of interesting things. I did a lot of the royal tours and things, and again, they're all quite fascinating, I never did photograph Lady Diana, although there are stories about that. I have a friend who was Trudeau's, actually a number of the prime ministers, charge d'affaires and she has pictures, which she's never going to show me, of Lady Di swimming in Pierre Trudeau's pool. I would love to have had those. Like those would be classics. But yeah, I never got to photograph her. But I did photograph her husband. Her husband, he hated photographers more than anybody I've ever met, and that's a whole story on its own. And I didn't blame him. I mean, you know, what can I say? If you live in the world of that, it's deadly. You can't pick your nose without some photographer grabbing a shot. Anyway, next, somebody hit me with something else.
Have you ever thought of writing a book?
People ask me that on social media all the time. I have, I don't know, 5,000 friends and 10 or 20,000 followers. I always say that as soon as the GoFundMe gets ready to hire security for me, because if I wrote what I really thought and what I really saw, I'd be a dead man. But no, I also keep saying to my wife that when I mellow out, and she's saying, yeah, that's never going to happen. I might at some point, but that's a whole story on its own. But yes, thank you. Thank you.
What made you choose photography?
Well, Karsh himself, because, by the way, when Karsh did in fact see the picture I did of Roll-Off Benny, oh, I forgot that one. I forget my own damn stories. When he saw it, about 6 months later, again, the shadows of, I'm there all the time. When he saw it, he said, oh, I saw the article, right? And I went, great, great, great. He said, you know, he actually said, you know, you're wasting your time as a writer. Honest to God, that's what he said to me. And there was a second thing. When I wrote an article, I was meticulous. I was meticulous as a writer. I would cross-reference everything. You don't want to debate with me on social media. I'm a nutcase for detail. And I spent 2 days writing that article, okay? And I probably spent 10 minutes taking the picture. Well, at the end of the day, I still remember getting the check from the Citizen, and I got something like $60 for writing the article and $75 for taking the picture. I went, wait a second, I'm not stupid. What the heck is this? You know, what is this? I still wrote. Every now and then I wrote about things like when I went to the deepest mine in Canada, I wrote about it. When I went up north, I wrote about it. And the Citizen was only happy to run the stuff. So I had no hard feelings against them. It really is a case where I just, you know, there isn't money in it, and these days even less money. The funny part about the Citizen was at some point I missed the ice storm, and there was that big blackout that happened. And I said, missed the damned ice storm, because I was actually shooting during the ice storm commercially, long story. And so I ended up basically making a point, that blackout, I'm going to get something. So I jumped in my car, drove across, and shot the skyline of Ottawa with virtually no lights on except the Parliament buildings, right? I took that file, brought it into my computer, and sent it to whoever was the photo editor, and I said, there you go, what do you think of that? And he was like, oh my God, we want to use that in the front cover. And I said, well, that's really cool, great. I said, what are you offering? And he said, I think he said $30. And I went, I said, I can't write an invoice for $30. I said, I'll tell you what though, here's what I want. I want you to write at the bottom of the cut line, not just a little credit, I want you to write, Ottawa photographer Paul Couvrette made a special point of capturing this, boom, boom, boom. And you know what? That on the front page of the Citizen was worth $1,000 back in the day. So I went, okay, fine, because $30 is nothing, I'm sorry. Anyway, next.
This gentleman down here.
I actually have a question about Karsh. So, I mean, I think it's accepted that any great photography is a combination of creative vision and technical skill.
Right.
I've heard a few things over the years about Karsh from friends who actually were there when he was doing shoots, and I believe in his biography it was quoted, somebody was quoted as saying he was using very outdated lighting techniques. And so I'm wondering what you would say about his technical skill.
Technical skills, he really was. He was a great technician. His printer was an incredible technician. His printer was really quite, I met his printer actually. And Karsh did a thing, he understood how to expose film. he basically underexposed and overprocessed. And I basically, when I started, I turned my little, kitchen in my little bachelor apartment on Metcalf Street into a darkroom, and I knew that he did this, and I did exactly the same thing to get deeper blacks. It's a real finicky, fine line technique, but Karsh really did know. Now, dodging and burning those things, I'm sure that you can make a mistake so easily. Digital today is just like remarkable, Almost anybody can take, I shouldn't say this, but can take a pretty damn good picture with a digital camera if they know how to fix it in Photoshop. The dynamic range of digital is remarkable. Back then, you could burn out some highlights pretty badly. You could save them with a whole lot of printing. And I've seen some of the sketches of some of the famous photographers, from Ansel Adams on down through, how they would dodge and burn and fix something and sometimes something that they couldn't even capture with a photograph. But, I mean, he basically, this business of the highlights, I'm sure he blew a few of them, and he might have had some of them retouched back in. I've looked at a couple of his prints that were retouched like crazy, and there's no question that he put stuff back into those things on occasion. But no, he was an excellent technician. To do that while you're talking to some of these people is a skill. And to do that while you're talking to a person who is extremely powerful is another layer of skill. So an extremely skilled man for certain, as was Malak. Malak took forever to take a picture. He just, I watched him a couple of days photographing one bed of tulips. I'm like, good God, man, what are you doing, right? So they were both old school, very skilled guys, for sure. But it's a three-part skill. It's not easy at all. Not even close. What, somebody decide with a question?
Gentleman here first.
How did he learn to interact with such different people like Hemingway, Churchill, Rostropovich, and...
How did he learn that?
How did he learn, or what did you pick up from him?
I mean, both of them were very, if you know Armenian people, they're, a couple of my good friends are Armenian, they're all wild people, what can I say? They're very social, whatever, jovial. Basically, I'm sure that Karsh sat down and said to himself, how do I make my pictures better? This is not what didn't just happen per chance. That Churchill cigar thing, which, by the way, there are people who actually say it didn't happen in that way. I don't know. But if it did happen in that way, that was a plan. And I've done a few of those things myself, a few of those things where you just challenge a person. I mean, General Dallaire, I was told by a charge d'affaires, aide de camp, that I had 5 minutes with him. And I said, great, have a seat, sir. I understand that you're with such and such a regiment. And he went, oh, how did you know that? And I said, well, because my father was also with that regiment. Oh, your father served? And I said, well, he was first off the landing craft on D-Day.
Wow.
And he went, what? I said, yeah. I kept shooting. About 10 minutes later, his aide-de-camp came in and said, sir. And he said, Mr. Couvrette and I are chatting here. So, it's the gift of the gab. My father was like a crazy man. My father knew everybody. I mean, if I met people, it's crazy. My father was in France for one of the anniversaries of D-Day and met, I forget who, the Governor General, right? He's introduced and he's in France and he goes, okay, Couvrette, and comes back and about 6 months later, I'm photographing the Governor General. She said, I have to say, I met this amazing man. It's your father, right? I'm like, my father? She goes, yeah. I'm like, he rambled on for 3 hours about various things. So he had the gift of the gab like crazy. So some of that is there. It's funny because my real quick side story. I was photographing Paul Martin, and how do I get people to do things? I photographed Paul Martin on 3 or 4 occasions, and I convinced him to do things that were crazy. Now, how did I do that? Well, the first time I photographed Paul Martin, I said, Paul Martin, how are you doing? I'm just doing your headshot for such and such and such and such. And he goes, great. He said, I don't have much time. And I said, oh, I bet you have time to read Spider-Man comics. And he looked at me like, this man's a mental case. What's he talking about? And I said, you don't remember, do you? And he said, no. I said, yeah. You remember when your dad was in the federal government and you were sitting in the backseat of your limo and your bodyguard used to sneak you in chocolates and Spider-Man and Superman comics? He went, yes. I said, that was my dad. After that, Paul Martin was butter in the palm of my hand. It was great, you know, but I convinced him to do crazy. So that's a whole story on its own. I almost got him killed once in a photo shoot, but that's another story.
So I think we'll take one or two more.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to take one or two more questions, and then folks will have an opportunity to talk to you after.
Sure.
Gentleman here.
One down here.
What do you think about the evolution of artificial intelligence?
Oh, boy.
And
Have you run a couple of days? Sorry, I cut you off. And
well, just how you feel about it.
I play with it. It is going to destroy large quantities of the arts and music, and it's an unstoppable locomotive is really what it amounts to. The photography industry per se is over. It has been over for about 15 to 20 years. And that's another massive topic, but yes, it's got its pluses. My daughter is a biochemist, PhD biochemist, about to be. She will use AI to cure diseases in the future, but many other things, many jobs will be lost, some jobs will be created. It's a very scary time. It's an extremely scary time. And various artists sort of rail against it. Oh, good luck with that. I tried to form a union of photographers in 1993, and that didn't go very far. Worse than herding cats would be easier. But yeah, it's sad. I pity anybody. Anybody who is studying to be a photographer now should really look at pipe fitting, maybe. I was interviewed about 8 to 10 years ago about that. And I lost about 20 friends who are professors of photography and whatnot over the topic, but it's a CBC interview in which I said the industry is over. I can't complain. I lived in the glory days of photography. I still make a lot of pictures, and I still enjoy it, and I still sometimes will play with AI and do things. Some of it, by the way, fixing pictures. I just found pictures of the landing on D-Day, which no one has ever found. Aerial pictures of our troops landing, including my dad, and I have brought AI into the thing to bring them back into focus. I mean, it's an incredible thing. So there are pluses, but the negatives are massive.
So we have one final question, and then we'll let Sherry wrap up.
Thank you. Mr. Couvrette, the picture you showed us of Parliament Hill taken, which was put on the dollar bill.
Right.
I used to work at the Café en Bourget in the 80s, and you were telling us there that picture was taken from one of the salons upstairs. Is that true? Would you know that too?
The one of the
Dollar bill that was put on the dollar bill.
the one that Malak did.
Yeah, the one that
He
you
was at
showed
the
us.
EBNE plant.
Yeah.
He was at the EBNE
It's a very
plant.
good question. I don't know because, wow, when was that even taken? Was the museum even there? Good question.
The museum was not there.
Museum was not there, yeah.
And there's another story we were told at the time is that the museum, both parts of the museum were separated in order to keep that view.
Yes, that I've heard many times. You know, of course, that the museum, the shape of the museum is based on water.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a very good question. The angle of it looks like it was shot about ground level, if memory serves me well. But what was there before, I don't know. So that's a very good question. Very good question. I will tell you one thing, though. If you look on the $10 bill with the veteran, the gloves are mine. He's wearing white gloves. They're my darkroom gloves.